The passion of Jesus has always touched me very deeply, and I'm sure it has touched you also very deeply. But it can touch us even more deeply if we don't become bystanders. In other words, where we're just listening to this, saying, well, now Jesus is going into the garden, now he's appearing before Pilate, and so on. But when we enter with Jesus into that garden of Gethsemane, recognizing that sometimes in our own lives, that's where we have gone, that we also suffer. But maybe not as much as Jesus suffered, because as St. Luke tells us, that he suffered so much that his sweat became like drops of blood falling to the ground. That's how much he suffered. And he didn't want to go through this, because he said, Father, save me from this. And yet, he says that beautiful prayer, which I think is so important for us to say too, whenever we are in deep suffering. Not my will, but yours be done. And then, of course, you have Judas betraying him. And we have to say to ourselves, well, when we have been betrayed by someone, how have we responded? And yet, look how Jesus responds. With Judas, who betrayed him for what? 30 pieces of silver, and he simply says to him, friend. He calls him friend. How many of us could do that to someone who has betrayed us? And then Peter, as we heard, how he denies him not once, but 3 times. And in our own lives, how often we have made promises and maybe not fulfilled those promises. The ability to be able to say, yes, if I'm going to make a promise to someone, I'm going to have to fulfill that promise. And even when we don't, well, then Jesus is there to forgive us, to show us that mercy in our lives. Then, of course, he is led off, and he's given this opportunity to really absorb what we heard in that first reading, the scourging, where he was spit upon, ridiculed. All of that he absorbed. And how easy it is for us whenever we are ridiculed or whenever someone insults us, how do we respond? Jesus absorbed all that and accepted all that without any kind of rejection. He's led then before Pilate, and Pilate gives the individuals an opportunity to accept either this man Barabbas, who, by the way, if you go into the derivation of his name, means Son of God. And here they are, Barabbas and Jesus. Jesus, who is truly the Son of God. And the individuals then have to make a choice. And what choice do they make? They take Barabbas. And what are they to do with Jesus? Crucify him. Crucify him. Then on his trip to Calvary, what happens? Well, here is Simon of Cyrene, who is asked to bear that cross. And of course, his undoubtedly had a rejection. He didn't want to do that. Just like sometimes when Jesus says to us, well, if you're going to be my follower, you're going to have to pick up your cross each day and follow in my footsteps. And the initial reaction so often is, especially when we are suffering, oh no, I can't do that. And the ability to be able to respond to that call that Jesus gives each one of us. You have Veronica, who responded. She reached out. And we are invited, especially during this year of mercy, to reach out to individuals, especially those people that sometimes we have a difficult time reaching out to and accepting them in our lives. And Jesus says that beautiful response to the women who are crying and weeping and so on. He says, don't weep for me, weep for yourselves. The ability to be able, in all that suffering, that he could reach out to them. Because we know what suffering does in our lives, it turns us in on ourselves. And the ability then to be able to reach out even while we suffer. Very challenging to do that. And then, of course, you have Mary and John following him all the way to the foot of the cross. Mary, with all her singular privileges, there she stands beneath the foot of the cross, and she is powerless. She can't do anything except to unite her suffering to the heart of Jesus. And John, the only disciple, following Jesus all the way to the foot of the cross. And that, I think, is the invitation that Jesus gives us, to follow him all the way to the foot of the cross and to embrace that cross in our lives. That is our challenge. And always remember, any suffering that we endure in our lives can't begin, as St. Paul tells us, to compare to the reward that God is going to give us someday in heaven. Do we believe that? Yes. Let's try then to live it.